What's up, Flannelverse? It is week 2 of the NFL season. We're kicking things off with Thursday Night Football, Washington Commanders at the Green Bay Packers. You can see Adam has his Commanders jersey on, ready for the game. We're going to be going position by position here, starting with quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, kickers. We'll be looking at usage trends, coach speak, matchups, etc. As we go. Please do, as you're coming in, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. I'm trying to get to 6,000 subscribers by the end of the NFL season and could use your help. Also, and I've got the wrong thing on the bottom there. If you'd like to sign up for Run the Sims, you can use promo code Neil to get 10% off your first payment of whatever package you want. Of course, we're going to be using primarily going to be using all the bells and whistles here, running the Sims, using the Shady Portfolio Optimizer, etc. But they have some less expensive options as well if you play less DFS and you don't want to pony up for all the bells and whistles. Adam, are you excited for week 2, and how do you feel about this game?
Yeah, I am, because I think it's the first Commanders game that actually matters. Last week you could kind of sleepwalk through, and I missed half of it because I was working on projections for the 4 o'clock game. So excited to have an island game that I can actually just watch. But yeah, I'm not super optimistic about Washington, but looking forward to the game, and should be a fun fantasy game. Like, I think there's a lot of ways you can go. Obviously, 2 offenses that have plenty of playmakers, so should be a pretty fun one, I think.
It is way more fun, in my opinion, than like Bills Ravens. To me, is just like not that exciting of a showdown slate from the standpoint of like, it's hard to find anything that is like good contrarian plays. Whereas here, I feel like there are a number of different ways you can go, a lot of like sort of contrarian-ish options. So I do think that this is going to be a pretty fun slate to break down. I'm still kind of figuring out my angles, because I'm like, there are plays that I like. I don't think there are a ton that I love at this point. Do you have any like contrarian plays that you've fallen in love with yet?
So I have an idea in my head. I have something that I like. I don't know if it's contrarian or not, because I haven't looked at ownership yet. But I do like, in general, and I don't know, maybe you'll talk me off of this, but I kind of think, and I don't expect it to be like to a large extent, but like, I think there's a good chance that Washington has to go at least a little bit pass heavier here than they usually do, than they would like. They're playing a good team. They're on the road. Obviously, you had last week where they could just run constantly because there was no reason not to, and that's what they would like to do as an offense. But it is a capable passing offense, and so I think maybe they'll have to throw a little bit more. I would expect that Green Bay would love to be able to control possessions, run the ball a lot. So I do think it's kind of almost a situation where, like, we have Daniels projected actually for more passing attempts than Jordan Love. I think the prop market is similar, but so that's something where, like, I haven't looked at actual DFS ownership, so I don't know if that's contrarian or not, but I do think it's a game that sets up where you could see Washington kind of forced out of their preferred method of offense at least a little bit, and then Green Bay, in an effort to keep that ridiculously good offense off the field, maybe even leaning on the running game even more than they already do, which is a good amount.
Yeah, I think that certainly makes some sense. Like I said, we will be going position by position so we can talk through it, look at the ownership for these various players. Good to see our old pal Emac in chat, and even older pal Steven in chat as well. Good to see you guys. Joanne, everybody else. Love to see people here in the morning ready to talk some DFS. We're going to start with the quarterbacks. Adam, I assume Jaden Daniels, is that a Jaden Daniels jersey you're wearing there, or is that a croskey-merritt?
Yeah, it's Jaden Daniels. It was almost Kirk Cousins because I couldn't find Jaden Daniels right before the show, but did find it. I'd actually hung it up and was taking care of it correctly, which is unusual for me. So yeah, Jaden Daniels jersey.
Nice. I assume he's one of your favorite players in the NFL. He's one of my favorite players in the NFL, honestly. I love watching Jaden Daniels. Super fun. Projected.
I try not to let myself get too attached because I've already lived through RG3, but yeah, I love Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, I think he's going to be. I think his career is going to be a good one. Hopeful, at least. 51% flex ownership going to Jaden Daniels. 27% captain ownership in your ownership projection. So that's what, 78% overall ownership. I do want to just double, look at multiple sources. RG has Jaden Daniels at 23% captain ownership and 55. So it's really actually pretty similar to RG in terms of Jaden Daniels ownership, just a little bit less at captain there. Tough to argue with Jaden Daniels wherever you put him in your lineup. He runs so much. Strong passing game as well. Looking at last week in terms of neutral pass rate, we had the Commanders at, and this is maybe less important for the Commanders than teams that the quarterback doesn't benefit from running, but the Commanders were at 16th, so just right in the middle in terms of neutral pass rate last week. Let's talk about Jaden Daniels. How much do you like him this week?
Yeah, so I'm loading my lineups in now to see exactly what I have, but obviously going to like whatever you can get to with Jaden Daniels. Like, he gives you rushing touchdown upside, he gives you rushing yards upside, but obviously, like, he's a very capable passer as well, and that's kind of the thing that separates him, to some extent from other rushers. Not to like take anything away from guys like Justin Fields or your other run first quarterbacks, but a lot of times if they are likely to end up in a game that ends up being a little bit more of a shootout, or they have to throw a little bit more, that's not necessarily good for DFS. And that's not really the case with Daniels. Like, you have Terry McLaurin, you have Debo, you have, capable pass catchers, you have what should still be a very efficient offense if he does have to throw more. So I'm not, worried about it from that angle. At captain right now, he's my highest owned captain. He's in like 39% of the lineups I built at captain, which is obviously a pretty good amount. At flex, highest owned flex as well. So right now, at least, I pretty much have him everywhere. Obviously with the caveat that it's noon and all of this could certainly change. But at the same time, Jaden Daniels obviously not somebody that I expect to like be getting less of. And he's just kind of game script proof. Like, if they fall behind and they have to throw more, great. He can do that. He can still make big plays in the air. If they are playing from ahead and they can keep the ball on the ground, that's not going to kill him either, because obviously he has a ton of rushing touchdown upside. So goes without saying, but Daniels looks great.
Yeah, I feel like generally I think quarterbacks go over-owned in the captain spot because they project so well, so people just like naturally put them in there. But rushing quarterbacks, like elite rushing quarterbacks, are the one exception where it's like it's tough to argue that they're just great plays wherever you put them in your lineup. They just have such huge potential. On the other side, and I guess I should note with Jaden Daniels, obviously, I think you can play him anywhere in your lineup without any pass catching options because of his rushing ability. Even when he's in the captain spot, you don't need to stack him with anybody. Typically, I'm still going to want to stack him up with at least one pass catcher. I don't hate the idea of multi-stacking when I have Jaden Daniels in the captain spot, because I do think that tends to go a little bit under-owned. So there's just so many different ways you can play Jaden Daniels, which is just one more benefit. You can multi-stack him from the captain spot. I think I'm going to be trying to do that some, but I also think you can play him naked if you want to. It's kind of whatever you want to do with Jaden Daniels is totally viable. On the other side, we have Jordan Love projected for 51% flex ownership, 14% captain ownership. The Packers sort of surprisingly fifth in neutral pass rate last week. Now that's just 19 plays, but it's a little bit different from last year when they really tried to establish the run. They didn't pass nearly as much. So 68% in neutral pass rate to start is pretty promising for the passing game for the Packers. But I think, Adam, you already said you kind of think they're going to try to establish the run because they're facing the Commanders. Totally different scenario this week than they had last week. How are you feeling about Jordan Love?
Yeah, I mean, he still projects well. He's still a good quarterback. I'm still getting to him. Like, I have 12% at captain. I have 46% at flex. He still looks good here. But yeah, we have him projected for like 29 to 30 passing attempts, which is relatively low in general. There is, obviously people always ask about like game scripts for showdown games. And you and I both talked about that. It's not necessarily the way we think about it, especially with like Sims tools available and stuff now. But like, obviously this game could just shoot out and both of these guys end up having to throw a lot, in which case the ceiling is massive. But just, I assume, based on what Green Bay generally has liked to do in the past, and then also the fact that Washington is such an efficient offense, you would think that if they have their way, they do kind of try and limit the number of plays that Washington can run. And that would involve, leaning on Josh Jacobs a little bit more, which is somewhat of a negative for Love. You don't get obviously the same rushing upside or any rushing upside from Jordan Love like you do with Daniels. So he is somebody that is a little bit more game script dependent in that, if Green Bay does just run the ball, Jordan Love's not getting any of that. So, cue up him falling into the end zone 3 times from the one now. But that obviously lowers his floor a little bit, but the ceiling is still really high. He's still a good quarterback. He's reasonably priced at $10K. Like, he's $1,000 less than Daniels, as he should be. So I think he looks good, but I have like normal amounts of him as opposed to just jamming Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, I suspect I'll come in a little bit underweight to Jordan Love in the captain spot, just because I like Daniel so much, and 14% is kind of a lot for a non-rushing quarterback. So I will say I'll probably come in underweight in the captain spot, but overall, hard to argue with the ownership, and it's pretty easy to fit in the more expensive players because we do have so many like sort of low-priced options, like not super low-priced players that I love in general, but a lot in like that 3,000 to 5,000 kind of range. We have several really strong options there. So it's pretty easy to get a couple big pay up options into your lineups. With Jordan Love, I think I'm gonna require a pass catcher regardless of where I have him in my lineup, and I'd prefer to have multiple pass catchers if I play Jordan Love in the captain spot because again he doesn't run all that much, and on every passing play the quarterback gets outscored by his pass catchers. So if they're too concentrated on one pass catcher, it's hard for the quarterback when they're this expensive, especially to be the optimal captain. So generally, if I have Jordan Love at captain, would prefer to have multiple pass catchers in the flex. Anything else to note here with regards to the quarterbacks?
Same page with you as far as thinking about what Jordan Love, captain lineups look like. I just grabbed some of mine to look at quickly. But yeah, pretty much at least two Packers on seems to be all of them. He is. I do have him paired with Josh Jacobs quite a bit, which is kind of interesting because like Jacobs isn't a huge receiving threat out of the backfield, and they do obviously have so many pass catchers. But I do think it makes sense in that like when you think about the Packers offense, it's pretty easy to think about a game where like Love ends up being the optimal captain because he throws a few touchdowns, he spreads it out. No one receiver catches more than one of them. None of the receivers necessarily have like huge receiving yard games. And then Josh Jacobs still just has a big game in terms of maybe he gets into the end zone once on a rush, maybe he runs for 100 yards. So just from like the projection standpoint on Jacobs compared to the individual playmakers for Green Bay, I do think that pairing makes some sense, even though it's not like a huge positive correlation pairing between those two specifically.
Yeah, no, for sure. I guess you can't see it right now because it's too high. This is the weekly route share report. So just looking at routes from last week, Josh Jacobs, 52.2% route share, as you see here. So like he does run a lot of routes. He's not like a zero in the passing game. Only had, looks like probably just one target last week, 4.5% target share. But in general, he's like fine in the passing game. So yeah, that does make sense. And he doesn't necessarily, I mean, he's going to be a good play, I guess, regardless of the correlation with Love. So yeah, like to include Josh Jacobs in those stacks.
Yeah. And last week was really bullish for his receiving work. Like Wilson and Brooks were basically not involved at all as far as running routes. That's something that you probably see regress at least somewhat over the course of the season, but clearly it's not a bad sign to see Josh Jacobs running more routes than usual week one.
Yeah, we had Chris Brooks at 8.7% route participation, Emmanuel Wilson at 0% in the fantasy points data suite. So not very great there. All right, let's move on to running backs. All right, this will be fun. Let's talk through the Commanders backfield. I assume we're going to start with the assumption that Chris Rodriguez is going to be out again this week.
Yeah, that's I think the only reasonable assumption. They haven't activated. So in the Run the Sims projections right now, I already have Chris Moore elevated and in. He technically right now I think is still on the practice squad. My assumption is that they bring him up again. They go with the three running backs, which would be Rodriguez being inactive.
Okay. So yeah, Rodriguez likely inactive. Last week, I think it was a top 5 percentile outcome for Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt in his first career start, and a bottom 5 percentile outcome for the most vocal Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt hater on X. But he was good, but not like an amazing fantasy asset. So now we have Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt at salary of $7,000. Looking at last week's stats for Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt, so he had. Let me pull this up. 7.2 expected fantasy points. This is in PPR scoring. So this is DraftKings scoring, just 7.2 expected fantasy points. But then he did put up 14.2 fantasy points, was really efficient on the ground, 10 carries for 82 yards, didn't run a ton of routes. So there's the negative for Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt. I can pull up the route share report here. 13.5% route participation, but he's a rookie. And like he played really well in his first game. So my expectation is that croskey-merritt will take on more of a workload. We actually got a report yesterday from Fowler. I don't know his first name, but that he is expected to be the lead back over time, to take over the lead back role there. Do you think he's going to take on a bigger workload already today? How do you feel about the matchup? What are you thinking about with croskey-merritt?
Yeah, but like the problem, and this is what I've kind of the point that I've been trying to make about it. The problem is like bigger workload or lead back in the Washington offense is different than almost every other offense because there's work that he can't get ever. Like he's not going to start taking Jaden Daniels rushes and most importantly rushing touchdown equity. Debo is just there as again another red zone threat. Also, I do think that you see probably like against the Giants, you sort of saw the alternating drives between Eckler and croskey-merritt. I'm not sure croskey-merritt even had a touch in the first quarter. And it was just Eckler out there like that. That is the spot where in a neutral game, first and second down, you can certainly see croskey-merritt take more of the carries that Eckler was getting. Those aren't valuable DFS carries, but I mean, they are still touches. Like obviously if you're running the ball, you can break it any given play. So like it's good to get those, but they're not the most valuable touches. And I think it's hard for him to get the most valuable touches. I don't think he's overtaking Eckler as a pass catching back anytime soon. That's sort of, Eckler's thing combined with croskey-merritt not having that pedigree really. Like he's not expected. Maybe eventually he works into it, but like it's hard for me to just like think that is happening anytime soon. So that's kind of the issue from a DFS standpoint when you project him, especially in a game like this where they are on the road. It is likely to be a competitive game. I have him projected for like 33%, something like that, of Washington's carries, which again, like that number is just always going to be lower for a Washington back than for other teams because Jaden Daniels is taking such a large percentage of it because Debo is going to have a higher rushing market share than almost any other wide receiver. So 33% of Washington's carries is not apples to apples to saying 33% of another team's carries. Like it's not 33% of the running back carries. I think he's more than 33% of the running back carries.
Right.
But low routes run. So overall, like I think he's okay here. He's in like 10 to 15% of my lineups. That's I think where ownership is coming in as well. If he gets into the end zone, great. But like he's not super cheap. He's 7K. He's probably again in like the lead back first and second down role, but we don't know, and we still don't know like what red zone work actually looks like either. He got a carry from the 6 that he scored on, but you had McNichols. He didn't get any carries, but like McNichols was on the field in the red zone during the 2-minute drill in the first half, which again, that's something else with croskey-merritt where like 2-minute drill, it's going to be Eckler McNichols almost definitely. So you kind of like have that aspect too, where it's like, well, even if he is the red zone back, the primary, like red zone back, if it's inside 2 minutes when they happen to get in the red zone, it's probably not him. So overall, like I projected him, I think about as well. I projected him for like as much work as I think I reasonably could. Like I only gave Eckler 20% of Washington's carries. I gave croskey-merritt like 30 to 35%. I think he gets more work on the ground than Eckler does. It's just a matter of that actually translating to fantasy points. And that ends up being very, very touchdown dependent in a spot where you also have to deal with Debo and Daniels when you're close to the goal line.
Yeah, it's a really tough spot. So it's like, I think it's a tough matchup too with the Packers. Like it's sort of hard to tell at this point in the season. I always struggle with like the matchup data early in the season because it's like it's based on one game that they've played. They did shut down Detroit's running game, which is really impressive. The Packers shut down Detroit's running game, which is very impressive. Who knows if they're going to be able to continue to have that kind of success against the Commanders? I do think they have a strong defense with Micah Parsons there. Micah Parsons also didn't play like full time last week. I think he could work in and play a little bit more this week. So not ideal from that perspective. To me, it really comes down to ownership. Like if we do get croskey-merritt at 11% flex ownership, 1% captain ownership, that would be an absolute slam dunk for me. I would play a ton of croskey-merritt at those numbers because I do think there's a wide range of outcomes. Like I agree with you. Like he's probably not going to be getting much passing game work, which is kind of a focal point of the Washington offense too. Like if you read the coach speak throughout the summer, they're really interested in having their running backs catch passes in general, and he's just not that guy. And Austin Eckler very much is that guy. So I don't think he's going to get that work. Like you said, I think we can expect him to take a bulk of the running back carries. I think like he got half of them last week. I think that is probably the expectation. Maybe he takes on a little bit more than half, and then Eckler retains his role. But again, that's the running back carries. Jaden Daniels is going to get some carries. Eckler going to work in. I don't know. It's a little bit of a squeeze there in terms of his opportunities, particularly with the passing game work being so valuable. So ultimately, $7,000. If he were again coming in at 12% total ownership, I would absolutely love Jacory croskey-merritt. And even if he came in, and so Roto-Grinders has him at 21% flex ownership and 3% captain ownership. I think those numbers are fine. Not those wouldn't be like slam dunk numbers for me, but I think that those would be okay. I'd be happy to have about even with the field, but I wouldn't be shocked if he comes in way higher owned than anybody has him projected, because I think this is one where like projections don't account for the hype. Like it's just like he has so much hype surrounding him right now that I kind of think he's going to come in higher owned than anybody has him at which point to me, I would want to make the pivot to Austin Eckler, who is projected for same ownership, 3% captain ownership, and 22% flex ownership at RG. You guys have Eckler at 28% flex ownership, 3% captain ownership. So a little bit higher there. I don't know. I kind of anticipate the ownership flipping on the two of them somewhat. In which case I would absolutely love Austin Eckler as the pass catching back, which just brings up your floor and your ceiling. And then if he does work in a little bit more on the ground, I think he could look really great. First of all, what do you think of that thought that maybe Jacory croskey-merritt is just going to come in higher owned than anybody's projecting? And then also, how do you feel about Eckler?
Yeah, I think that is true. Probably like there is just so much hype around him. You have people that want him to succeed, and as I have found out, are not very realistic about what is actually available for him, I don't think. But so I do think it is likely that you see it come in a little bit higher. When I ran my stuff, I had the projection on Eckler a little bit lower, and the ownership projection on Eckler a little bit lower, and the ownership projection on croskey-merritt a little bit higher. And so I ended up like slightly under the field on croskey-merritt and slightly over on Eckler, but mostly just I expected to probably come out pretty efficient because, like you're saying, even though for 7K, croskey-merritt doesn't project great, you know, we have like a 7.5 to 8 fantasy point projection on him somewhere in there. There is still volatility there. Like he gets in the end zone, and that's like because, you know, you increase his projection basically 2x just from falling into the end zone.
Yeah.
So like if you knew he scored a touchdown. So there is still volatility there. We're at a time though where everybody's using Sims, and so that is accounted for generally correctly. So I expect that you'll probably get pretty efficient ownership there, where I think it's going to be normal across the industry. Like I don't think anybody's projecting croskey-merritt for more fantasy points than Eckler in full PPR, at least. I think from what I've seen, like our projections are pretty close to what anybody else has as far as the fantasy point difference between Eckler and croskey-merritt. So like I don't think you're going to run into some popular site just has croskey-merritt for 15 fantasy points and everybody's jamming him in. Like I don't think you're going to get that. You will probably get, you know, some more people that, you know, aren't using Sims just clicking croskey-merritt because oh yeah, he's the hyped running back and he had 14 points last week, you know, blah blah blah. But obviously they make up a smaller portion of fields as well. So I do think he is somebody I would point to as saying like, ownership algos probably are going to undervalue his actual ownership just because people want to play him. But I also just have a hard time thinking he gets that out of control when such a large percentage of the user base is using projections and Sims or optimizers, and you're not going to get any of those tools jamming him in at a really high rate, I don't think.
Yeah, no, that is true. And you can see here, fantasy points actually that's him at just 6.3 fantasy points, accounting for.
All right, so everybody go talk shit to the fantasy point guys about how much they hate Jacory croskey-merritt.
Why do you hate Jacory croskey-merritt so much? Exactly. So yeah, Adam is projecting for more than the fantasy points guys this week. What about McNichols? You gonna 1% flex ownership, 0% captain ownership, 2,800. Any interest in playing some Jeremy McNichols. We look at his 18.5% snap share last week. He did have 4 carries, ran 4 routes, 0 targets. I don't know. Is the price tag cheap enough that you're interested there?
It's really tough at 2,800, I think, especially when you have $400 Chris Brooks on the other side. The issue with McNichols, like he could. So the bull case, I guess, for McNichols is, like I just said with croskey-merritt, we only saw one, I believe, like normal circumstance red zone carry.
Yeah.
And it was the croskey-merritt touchdown from 6 yards out. McNichols was on the field in the red zone in the 2-minute drill. He is somebody that vultured touchdowns at times last year. Before things started looking like that was going to be Chris Rodriguez's job, I had actually mentioned that McNichols, I thought, was an issue for croskey-merritt as far as goal line touches. So, like, there is that potential role that we don't know if McNichols has or doesn't have. And then you do have him as potentially being on the field on passing downs. Like if Washington's playing from behind, we don't know what that looks like either because we didn't see it last week. If Washington gets down 10 points in this game, does it become still croskey-merritt and Eckler, or does it become McNichols and Eckler just, on the field constantly? So like there is that potential path, I guess, for McNichols. But like the problem you run into is that he is 2,800 and he does have Eckler. Like McNichols is on the team for special teams and pass blocking, but even if they're playing from behind, you expect Eckler to have the bigger role, even if they went to just like those two, Eckler to still have the bigger role. And then also, when you're just looking at McNichols' rushes last week, 3 of those 4, maybe all 4, were on that final drive after croskey-merritt iced the game on the 40-whatever yard run. croskey-merritt was done at that point, and they just put McNichols in, and he ran out the clock. So McNichols really had no role outside of that 2-minute offense at the end of the first half last week in non-garbage time.
Yeah, it's tough to get there, like I said, and we just have a lot of like pretty strong options. Obviously, could score a touchdown, and you'd probably want him if he scores a touchdown, but maybe not even. Like he probably needs to do a little bit more. Yeah,
because the other thing too that you have to keep in mind in the context of like this entire game is because Green Bay doesn't have that like clear number 1 receiver, they have a bunch of relatively cheap receivers. So like Romeo Doubs is $4,000. Romeo Doubs is $1,200 more than McNichols. So even if McNichols scores like 6.8 fantasy points, has 8 rushing yards and a touchdown, there's a really good chance, I think, that he's not optimal anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it would take a little bit more at his price tag. All right, we'll move on to the Green Bay running backs, unless you have anything else you want to say about Corey croskey-merritt.
No, I think that covers it. I'm high on him. Fantasy points is low on him.
Yeah, that's good. Good to state your opinion there. Josh Jacobs, 10,600 projected for 45% flex ownership, 18% captain ownership. I think that seems fair. Like I think I'm kind of with you that I expect them to want to run the ball quite a bit here. Just one of the better workloads of all running backs. How much are you getting to of Josh Jacobs? How much you like him today?
Too much. 23% at captain and 53% at flex. Our projection right now, and again, like it's early in the day, we're gonna double check all the work and everything, but like we're higher on Jacobs than other places I've seen, and everybody's high on Jacobs in general. So like, he just had a really optimistic workload in week 1, and we know he's somebody that Green Bay will lean on. So like, you're not looking at Josh Jacobs. He had an 83% rushing market share in neutral game situations week 1. The only other person that got a carry was Tucker Kraft. So of the running backs, he got all of the competitive carries week 1. We know that they'll lean on him. Like he had, a ton of usage last year as well. And then you mentioned the passing game work, like projected a lower route share this week than last week, just because that is only 1 week of data. And I assume he comes back to earth at least a little bit, but you saw him get all the rushing work week 1. You saw him get the vast majority of running back routes week 1. This is a game where, like we said, it feels pretty safe to project a big workload for Jacobs because, for one, Green Bay wants to do that anyway. Like they run their offense to a large extent through Josh Jacobs. And then 2, the easiest way to keep Jaden Daniels off the field is to give Josh Jacobs work. So I don't know. To me, everything just sets up as Josh Jacobs looking really, really good here. And then having that bigger passing role, even if he's not going to be, a 5-6 reception running back probably ever, just at least having that opportunity in full PPR does increase the floor a little bit, does increase the projection some. So I have a lot of Jacobs, which I never think feels great on a running back, especially when they're not like a PPR scam guy. Jacobs is, while I think he has a relatively high floor because of the workload and everything, he is somebody where, like, if Green Bay gets down 2 or 3 touchdowns somehow, Jacobs is probably dead. Whereas, like, you get somebody like, Achane, and it's like, yeah, whatever. He's going to catch 7 passes now and make it up. So, like, it never feels great getting a ton of that guy. But the combination of, I think, a lot of things working in his favor as far as workload, what the Packers would like to do, et cetera. And then also going back to, Green Bay doesn't have that dominant, expensive number 1 receiver. And really, Washington doesn't either. Like, McLaurin is very, very good, but he's not the slam dunk, always has a huge game wide receiver 1. Debo is not super expensive. Like, there's just a lot of ways that Josh Jacobs ends up in your lineup, even if he has like an average or slightly below average game, still ends up in the optimal lineup just in terms of raw points, because there's no like clear non-quarterback pay up that is like a lock to smash or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I think I'm going to get to a ton of Josh Jacobs. So in week 1, we got the question: is the Commanders' defense better against the run or the pass? And I think, to me, that's really tough to what's the strength of the Commanders' defense? Is it possibly actually a pass heavy game plan tonight for the Packers? So in week 1, they were pretty strong against the pass. I think it was a really tough, but that was also, they were playing against the Giants. So it's sort of hard to parse what is going to be their strength this year. I'm going to have to look into it a little bit more. But I kind of think right now we don't really know. I think towards the end of last year, they were pretty good against the pass. Like, after the beginning of the year, Commanders were terrible against the pass, and then they just got better and better throughout the year. And by the end of the year, they were actually pretty strong against the pass. And right now, I think it's sort of up in the air. I think it's generally kind of just a middle of the pack defense. Rant says he thinks their defense is bad. I kind of think the Commanders are middle of the pack. Do you have any kind of strong lean on like what their strength is defensively?
Not really. Last year, opponents ran like 48 to 49% of the time against Washington, which is relatively high. But again, just kind of points to a somewhat balanced, probably slightly run heavy approach. They're an annoying defense, I feel like, to talk about, because like they can be good in any given aspect, like any given game, but they don't have, they're not like super, or at least in the past haven't been super consistent either. But yeah, to your point also, like, it's so hard to take anything from week 1. I was going to say it early when you were talking about like Green Bay shutting down Detroit's running backs too. Like, right now you look at that and you say, and this is always the thing that makes small sample size defensive stuff difficult early in the season. Like, right now you look at it and you say like, oh wow, they did a really good job shutting down Detroit's really good running game. In week 6, we could just be saying, holy shit, Detroit sucks. They need
Right.
Johnson back.
Yeah.
Like, you don't even know for sure. You're operating with like priors on top of priors basically at this point in the year. Like, it's a 1-game sample anyway, and then you don't even actually know if Detroit's any good.
Right.
So like, it's so hard to come up with anything really concrete at this point.
And we were pretty sure that the Giants are bad offensively. So
Right.
it's like, okay, they shut down the Giants. But what does that even matter? Like, who doesn't really tell us anything about the Commanders defense? Yeah, I could see them being forced to pass more. Like, the Packers might be forced to pass more,
Right.
because they have to keep up with the Commanders. But I don't know that I have a strong lean right now for what part of their defense is better. Well,
That's kind of my assumption in this game in general, is like, I think both offenses, if they have their way, would be run heavy.
Yep.
But both offenses are also good enough where it's not crazy to think that either of the opposing teams could just be forced into a pass heavy game because they just fell behind by 2 or 3 touchdowns very quickly for whatever reason.
Yeah. Same page. outside of Josh Jacobs, so we both like Josh Jacobs quite a bit to put a bow on it. We think he's going to get a lot of work here. Both these offensive lines are also like pretty good so far. They both the PFF has them entering week 2 both as top 10 offensive lines, which is only slightly better than they were kind of ranked heading into the season. So that's another positive for the running game, I think. Chris Brooks is 400, so I assume he would be your second favorite running back here, projected for 9% flex ownership, 0% captain ownership. Brooks last week played 9 snaps, got just 1 carry, ran 9% of routes, so not super involved. Are you interested in Brooks this week?
I have like 15% at captain right now, or not. Geez, not at captain. Okay. At flex. None at captain. I was looking at my captain lineups. None at captain. He's 400. He maybe catches a pass or something. Like he had a bigger workload than Wilson did, which was the big takeaway. You expect Jacobs to dominate everything out of the backfield there, but you do have a $400 guy that's probably at least stepping on the field and running a few routes, and maybe you'll get a handoff or two. So have him projected for like 3.5 fantasy points or something. I think that's pretty industry standard because he does run routes. But clearly it's not one of these cheap guys where you're like, oh wow, his role is like so much bigger than $400. But it's like, okay, well, it's slightly bigger. He probably should be, if McNichols is going to be 2,800, Brooks should probably be like 1,200 or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Brooks, nice price tag there at 400. 19% of snaps last week. This is the snap share report. Here is the route share report. Ran 9% of routes. Not like, don't have huge expectations there, but as Adam said, just like one caught pass, and he might be enough at 400 because we don't have a lot of awesome cheap options on this slate. So he might just be the guy you need, even with very, very few fantasy points. So it looks good here. And playing any Emmanuel Wilson, not projected for any ownership?
I don't have any. Or sorry, I have 1%. He's 2K is the problem. Like,
yeah,
you can absolutely make the argument that like week 1 is 1 week, and maybe Wilson is the running back 2 this week. But 1, that's not a super valuable role as long as Josh Jacobs is healthy, and 2, he's $2,000. So now you're getting back into like McNichols territory where what does he actually have to do to be somebody that you know for sure you want to have? Like if you knew ahead of time that Wilson scores a touchdown, yeah, you're playing a lot of him at 2K, but it's not even like he's guaranteed to be optimal. And obviously that's based on what we saw week 1 and the role that you expect for Green Bay running back 2 or 3. Very unlikely anyway. Like at least with McNichols, there's some percent chance that is greater than 0 that when Washington has the ball on the 4-yard line, McNichols is on the field. Barring a mid-game injury or something, I don't know how in the world Wilson ends up on the field ahead of Jacobs in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's kind of a tough click there because of the price being just a little bit too high. You know, we could have, there's always the possibility of like Jacobs runs it down, 50-yarder down to the 1-yard line, and then he's exhausted and they decide to, but even there, I think they've just used Jacobs most of the time. So yeah, it's a pretty thin play.
Or Brooks or Love.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of, or Kraft, as you said, Kraft got a carry last week. Kraft might just be the guy at the 1-yard line there. Yeah, a lot of different ways that could go that would not benefit Brooks there, or sorry, Wilson. All right. Any other, I don't think there's any other running backs we need to talk about. No, we talked through all the running backs. Let's move on to wide receivers. So starting with the, actually, let's start with the Commanders side. I'll scroll up here. But Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, we've got Terry McLaurin projected for 38% flex ownership, 5% captain ownership. That's kind of a nice number to me, that 5% captain ownership. You look at last week's numbers here, snapshot report. Well, I'll let you get into it. How much do you like Scary Terry this week?
I like him more in my head, I guess, than I do in stuff that I ran. I didn't get to him at captain. I got to 23% at flex. I think there's kind of 2 competing arguments here. I agree with you that the ownership is pretty appealing. Like you're talking about, we just talked about when we talked about Jacobs, that there's not really outside of the quarterbacks and Daniels specifically, like a dominant pay up option other than I think Daniels and Jacobs. So That's really wide open. Like, you don't have it at wide receiver in this game. And McLaurin clearly has a very, very high ceiling, especially if Washington does end up having to pass a little bit more than they would like because Green Bay is able to keep up with them or Green Bay has a lead. The problem with McLaurin is that he's not super expensive at 9K, but he is, priced as a wide receiver 1, and you expect him to be relatively inefficient, but also just because he's going to be getting more of like the deep routes than Debo. Like, Debo's going to be the guy that they're looking to get the ball in his hands more underneath and let him make plays. So you expect a lower catch rate for McLaurin, but then you also have the issue of, and it's harder to quantify, he held out the entire offseason, and it generally does take those guys a little bit longer to, get back up to speed. Now, obviously, he's familiar with Daniels. They played together last year, et cetera. So maybe it's a little bit quicker, but you do have that combined with Debo being there now. Whereas last year, Noah Brown was your wide receiver too. And so there was more of, I think, and I mean, even last year, early in the year, like, where McLaurin was really your only guy, they still had games where they just pretended he didn't exist. So he just doesn't have the same level of consistency that a lot of those pay up guys do. Now, the nice part, if you want to play him, is everybody knows that. Like, that's something that goes into projections. Like, he's not even, we have right now, I think, more fantasy points projected to Debo than to McLaurin. The gap for us is a little bit bigger than I would like, and maybe it closes a little bit by lock, but projecting Debo and McLaurin very similarly, if not Debo higher, I think is pretty much consensus right now. But there is that really wide range of outcomes. And again, this is something that using a Sims tool compared to an optimizer can really help with. The ceiling for McLaurin is still really high. He absolutely can just be the captain that you need if he goes for 120 yards and a touchdown, which is firmly in his range of outcomes. But from like a median standpoint and a chances of success standpoint, there's a lot that needs to go right for him to land in the optimal lineup, and he doesn't project that well for his salary when you consider that, even from like a, even if you're projecting Washington to be a little bit more pass heavy than usual, like we are, that's still not a ton of passes. Like, Daniels is projected to throw like 32 and a half passes. You have, on Sunday slate, you'll have guys projected to throw 35, 36, 37 passes. So like, that's still a relatively low number overall. It's just higher than you'll get a lot of times for Daniels. So there's a lot of things kind of working against McLaurin from a median standpoint, but that ceiling is still really high. He's still the wide receiver 1 on a big play, very efficient offense that can be very good at passing if they need to. You're muted.
Love the point about McLaurin holding out and that maybe slowing him down. That's something that Scott Barrett talks about all the time, that you have a lot of stats on receivers that hold out, or I think players overall that hold out, kind of taking some time to get going early in the season. So they really do see a dip in production early in the season. We saw that in week 1 with McLaurin. But then ultimately, I do like, you just see this 5% ownership for Terry McLaurin at captain. That particularly stands out to me. Like, overall, I think he's a fine play at his ownership number in the flex, but if he comes in at 5% at captain, like, given how boom bust he is, like, he booms in a big way more than 5% of the time. So to me, that is what really stands out. Same for you, it looks like.
Yeah, it's to me, this is what I always find so difficult about like NFL DFS analysis and playing, is you can get into the weeds on all of this stuff, but then you're still talking about a 1-game sample size. And so it kind of turns into like the meme where the low IQ person is like, Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 1. And then like all of the mid guys are like, oh, but hold out, blah, 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 blah. And then the smart person is like, Terry McLaurin, 5% owned, wide receiver 1.
Yeah.
Like, if you just take a step back and, we talk about it a lot in terms of DFS tournaments. It's not about being right the most often. It's about getting paid the most when you are right. If you just take a step back, like, there's a compelling argument at least to consider, like, okay, screw it. It's 5% on Captain Terry McLaurin on a showdown slate. I'm going to click that button.
Yeah.
There's an argument for that. Like, that's, he had like, I think it was like a 12% target per route run in week 1. It was like 32% for Debo. So it's really difficult to not think that there is some something lost in that holdout, and it's going to take at least a couple of weeks to get it back, especially when you see Daniels and Debo on the same page and him targeting Debo a lot. Like, that is a proven receiver that has stepped in now, where, not to take anything away from Noah Brown again, but like, I have a much easier time believing that Daniels can just be like, yeah, okay, whatever, I'm just going to throw it to Debo for a bit, than, oh yeah, I'm just going to keep pounding, forcing passes to Noah Brown. Like, that's
Right.
not going to happen. But, I think that the most likely outcome is that you see them kind of have to like slowly ramp things up with McLaurin. Another positive thing for McLaurin, though, like, the targets weren't there, but he ran routes on like 85 to 90% of dropbacks last week. So you didn't see him off the field, using different route data, obviously, but like, it's still directionally the same. He ran a ton of routes.
Yeah.
So that was a good thing to see. Like, you didn't have with the Niners, for example, I think Juwan Jennings ran like 65-ish% of routes. You didn't see that. You didn't see them holding McLaurin off the field. So he was out there. So it's really just a matter of get on the same page with me, Daniels, go make plays, which you would assume happens faster than if you also add in the variable of convince the coaching staff you can be on the field and then get on the same page and go make plays.
Yeah, he's already out there. Like, they're clearly, like, they're not punishing him. Like,
Right.
he wasn't getting lower usage because he's being punished for the holdout, anything like that. I think the team is happy for him. They're still getting on the same page. I also just want to note that his ADOT last week, so it's 19.3 ADOT for McLaurin, 7.1 for Debo. One like potential fly in the ointment for McLaurin is just that they might be giving more of the short yardage stuff to Debo, so he might just like lose some of his route tree, which like that will be like, okay, so he's still going to have the boom bust, like have those big splash plays, have some big scores, but it might mean that the median is lower this year in general because he's not getting just the easy stuff. He's only getting the stuff that is far down the field, which hurts his ceiling a little bit, but then also just really crushes his floor if he's only a big play. I mean, that's a really huge ADOT. That's also, again, one game. Like, we don't know if this is going to hold for the rest of the season, but
I think it kind of creates a similar situation, different problem, but similar situation to when you had the period of the season last year where Kingsbury was keeping him only on the left side of the field, and their offense was just very like screen heavy, short, get the ball out of Daniels' hands. And every week you would break down this game and say, look, Jaden Daniels looks good. Terry McLaurin's the clear wide receiver one. It has to happen eventually. But like, then there's also clear reasons, clear things that are lowering that floor, like you said, and are holding him back. I think it's reasonable to kind of view this the same way, where, again, different problem, but same outcome. If McLaurin is just going to be running routes that are more consistently, they're big play routes, so like the ceiling is still really high. But if he's going to lose out on a lot of the, okay, well, he didn't have a big splash play, but he did catch 5 passes today, which, just kind of gives him that built-in floor. If he's going to lose out on a lot of that, and you're going to see catch rate go down as ADOT goes up, which is just how it works, then, yeah, he can still absolutely break the slate as a 5% owned captain on one play. But the games where he doesn't have that massive play, he's more likely to just like not even be a factor, really.
yeah. And it also it hurts the ceiling just a little bit because it is like, if you take away 2 catches for 10 yards, because if those goes to Debo, like that is
Right.
3 fantasy points that just comes off even in a ceiling game. So if this holds, I don't love that for Terry McLaurin, but in a one game, certainly love the 5% cap and ownership. Definitely into that, going to be over the field there. I think I named him as one of my 3 favorite captains on this slate because the ownership is just too low for a guy that we know has a big ceiling here. Debo Samuel, though, 78% route participation last week, saw 10 targets in his first game with Jaden Daniels. You have Debo Samuel. You do have him projected 2 fantasy points better than Terry McLaurin, getting slightly lower flex ownership at 35%, but then 11% captain ownership. So it's sort of interesting to see that. I would almost want to like inverse the ownerships on Debo and McLaurin. How are you feeling about Debo today?
Yeah, I'm getting more Debo. I have 33% or 32% Debo at flex. I have like 9% at captain. He's my 4th highest owned captain right now, behind Daniels, Jacobs, and Love. Obviously, Daniels really dominating that, and then Love, and then a drop off to like everybody else. But I am getting Debo there. Like, his price tag is a little bit more expensive. Like, relative to McLaurin, there is some sticker shock when you just look and you're like, all right, Debo's 8,600, McLaurin's 9K, and it's like, again, well, I just want to click McLaurin at lower ownership, but then you have kind of everyday data point other than, well, screw it, it's Terry McLaurin, pointing to like Debo probably is the better play, especially in full PPR. But even in not full PPR, like you have rushing touchdown upside for Debo. He only got the 1 carry last week, which he scored on, but I think Kevin projected for like 2.5 carries, like 10 yards here. I think his prop line is like 7.5. So there is some built-in rushing upside for him. There is absolutely rushing touchdown equity that Terry McLaurin doesn't have. And then when you think about full PPR, he's probably going to catch more passes than McLaurin because of where he's running routes. And also, like, when Washington does have to pass, generally they do run a lot of, like, not that they don't have, don't use a deep threat and don't make big plays, but they've been, get the ball out of Daniel's hands quickly, get it to Ertz, get it to, to Eckler, get it to shorter routes. And we've seen that a lot last year too, which Debo just fits perfectly.
Yeah, Debo was like the perfect addition for this team. Also from the standpoint of like, I don't remember the exact stat, but I know that Washington like led the league in terms of percentage of their touchdown catches that were just caught in the end zone as opposed to run into the end zone after catching it. And Debo is like the perfect guy to give them an out, to like get him the ball and then have him run it in instead of just catching the ball in the end zone. So it makes sense that they went out and got this guy for a purpose, and he's been serving that purpose, served it well in week 1. I regret not drafting more Debo in best ball. Are you already kind of wishing you had more there?
Yeah, kind of. I just had a really hard time like clicking him over the guys around him. And I mean, at the same
Me
time,
too.
like it's not like Travis Hunter wasn't very involved week 1 or
Right.
stuff like that. But I probably should have had. I do wish I drafted a bit more than I did. And to your point, that was kind of an argument that I was making in the offseason about Debo, where you had everybody like, oh, another old guy for Washington, like he's washed, blah blah blah. He doesn't have to be peak prime Niners Debo to be really, really effective in a Jaden Daniels offense. Like
Right.
you are getting just like the prototypical short yardage, yards after the catch, get the ball in the backfield type guy. And you're putting him in an offense that has a ton of space because of the other guys around him. I mean, I thought he was a great fit for this team, even if he is, not 23 years old.
Yeah, no, he looked like it. Looked like in week 1. Seems like he's in shape, breaking tackles. Love some Debo.
Yeah, I guess the training camp, this guy is slow from like July, didn't
I
hold
know.
very well.
Yeah. I mean, agreed. OMG Low says Debo has the higher projection at the lower price. Of course, he'll be more popular. Yeah, I mean, I agree with it. I just I would like to have more of McLaurin, particularly in the captain spot. And then the tertiary receivers, I also like quite a bit. Noah Brown at 3,200, projected for 18%, flex ownership 1%, captain ownership, and then Jalen Lane. Those are the two that I think I have the most interest in. Jalen Lane 1,600, projected for 3% flex ownership, 0% captain ownership. I can pull up the numbers here so we can see the route participation. So last week, Noah Brown 51.4% route participation, Jalen Lane 35.1, 3 targets for Brown, 2 for Lane. How do you feel about the tertiary receiving options for the Commanders?
Yeah, I think pretty much the same page as you. I have like 18 to 20% Noah Brown at flex. He was just, the wide receiver 3, which I think was to be expected. The only real question for like Noah Brown all offseason was like, is the guy on IR? Does he have work?
Right.
Like a
They
working
weren't giving us
knee?
updates.
Yeah, there were no updates. I kept in best ball, like wanting to click him in the last round. Like this might just be Washington's wide receiver 3, and like everybody's worried for no reason. And then it's like, also he might just like not have a knee.
Right.
But yeah, like he ran, 55-ish% of routes. He was clearly third. He's got all the things that come with, being a third wide receiver. Like he's not going to be consistent, but he's 3,200. So I'm around like 18 to 20% there. And then I have 9% flex on Jalen Lane. He's only 1,600. So he's $1,200 less than McNichols. He's less than Emmanuel Wilson. He was 4th in route participation behind Brown, but ahead of Chris Moore. And again, I have made the assumption that Chris Moore is elevated. That is something to keep an eye on here too, because Moore ran like 20 to 25% of routes last week, had a catch. If he's not elevated, then maybe McCaffrey takes those routes, but also it could just mean higher route participation for Brown and for Lane. So that will be something to keep an eye on, because even though Chris Moore was wide receiver 5, this was a team that outside of Debo and McLaurin, they really spread routes out amongst wide receivers 3 through 5, as opposed to really concentrating them on like 3 and 4. So Chris Moore does matter here.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought there with Chris Moore. Wait, sorry, did you say you are if Chris Moore is out, or if he's in, how are you feeling about Jalen Lane?
So I'm getting to Lane even with Moore projected in. I have like
Okay.
9%. But if Moore were out, I don't think I would necessarily just like give all of Moore's routes to McCaffrey because he pretty clearly is not the guy right now. Again, like I assume they just elevate Moore, but
Yeah.
there are routes that Moore ran that need to be redistributed if he's out. So I think it would be like a marginal bump for guys like Brown and Lane if he is out.
Unsigning asks about Brown. Can you justify him at 800 less than Dobbs? Feels like because of Dobbs' price, it's going to be hard playing any of these other cheap guys. And then OMG Lowe's basically gives my answer when you factor in ownership. Yeah, because it's like I think Dobbs is more likely to outscore Noah Brown. Like he's more often he's going to outscore Noah Brown more often than not, but like not that much more. And we're getting Noah Brown at pretty low ownership. So in my opinion, yes, you can. And it also makes it easier to leave some salary on the table. Do you have a different answer, Adam?
No, same answer. Like I have way more Dobbs than I do Lane, but one, you can play them together. And two, like, yeah, they're still,
He was talking about Noah Brown
or
versus
Brown.
Dobbs.
Yeah, same
Yeah,
answer. I have more Dobbs than Brown. But yeah, like you can play them together. And still there's just going to be games where Brown outscores Dobbs and Dobbs is getting like 4 times the ownership. So, I mean, if I'm playing like one lineup, I assume I'd be more likely to have Dobbs than I would Noah Brown. But,
yeah, I think it's a pretty strong play. I wouldn't be that surprised to see Noah Brown's route participation go up again. It was at 51%, but this was his first game back after he'd been injured for like the entire offseason. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that number go up. In which case,
and that's another point with the Chris Moore thing. Like it is possible, like if Chris Moore is not elevated, maybe like all of that does just go to Noah Brown, and Noah Brown is out there running 75% of routes now. And like Jalen Lane is still at, around 30%, something like that. You certainly could see that happen if Moore isn't elevated, because again, like I think not that it's guaranteed. I think the least likely thing if Moore is not elevated is that McCaffrey just like steps into some relatively big role here. I think if he's not activated, it probably, to your point, like would point to like, well, we just are going to use Noah Brown more. We don't need Chris Moore.
Yeah, could be. I mean, so you think McCaffrey, like, was he active last week? He didn't run any routes.
I believe so. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, they talked about him a few times during the offseason, kind of made it sound like they're expecting him to take a big step forward this year, or some step forward. Too, so. I know, like last year, that was so hyped up. This year again, sort of, and then didn't run any routes. So to me, Luke McCaffrey at this point is just kind of an afterthought.
And that's basically, I guess, what I'm trying to get to is like, if they were to not elevate Chris Moore, yeah, maybe McCaffrey does play, but like, I think more logically, it would mean either we're comfortable giving Noah Brown more routes now that he has a game back, or we really liked what we saw from Jalen Lane. He's going to run more routes now. He's somebody that got a lot of hype in the preseason. Like, I think both of those things are more logical than we don't need to activate Chris Moore today because suddenly we're going to just give those routes to Luke McCaffrey. Like you could have done that week 1.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's move on to the Packers receivers. As you said, like we don't really have a true wide receiver one here. Looking at the ownership numbers, so we actually have the highest projection is on Romeo Doubs, who is 4,000, projected for 9.7 fantasy points here, 50% flex ownership, 8% captain ownership. So getting a ton of ownership. Then you have the second highest projection goes to Jaden Reed, just barely beating out Matthew Golden. Jaden Reed's 8,200, 21% flex ownership, 2% captain ownership. Matthew Golden, 6,400, 10% flex ownership, 1% captain ownership. And then finally, Dontavian Wicks, projected for 5.6 fantasy points at 3,600, 11% flex ownership, 0% captain ownership. Then you got Malik Heath, Savion Williams maybe mixing in. It's kind of a mess here in Green Bay. I'll pull up the route share report so you can look at this as we talk about it, or sorry, the advanced receiving page. But I mean, Dobbs like seems kind of too obvious. Like just given that he projects so well at 4,000, does the 58% ownership scare you off of Dobbs? How you feel about him?
Yeah, I mean, at least a little bit. Like he's somebody where I'm gonna have a lot of him. I don't really see a way around that, given how cheap he is. And there's no clear wide receiver one for the Packers in terms of production game to game, but he was the clear wide receiver one in terms of route participation last game. So, he does have that working for him as far as just being the most likely to be on the field. And so, yeah, he looks really good, but there is still a ton of volatility just obviously in general. But then when you also factor in the fact that the Packers do have a lot of quality pass catchers, you never know exactly who's going to get what in what given week. Even though Dobbs does project as the best option at that price, there's plenty of weeks where he's just not going to have a good game and other guys on the Packers are. So I think it's, really just balancing the ownership that's going to come with being such a clearly good point per dollar projection with, there's still a ton of volatility in how this Packers offense goes in terms of not only need it to be a game where the Packers do end up throwing and somebody produces through the air, but he's still just competing with so many different guys, even though he is likely to be on the field more than all of them. So I have like 33% at flex right now. I have like 6% at captain. He's my highest owned Packers wide receiver, but I think I am still coming in a little bit below the field overall.
Yeah, so it's a case where like he's the one that you're going to have the most of, and also he's going to be the one that you're under the field, and maybe you'll be over the field on all the others. So it's like it seems bullish that he's your highest, but also you are under the field in terms of Dobbs ownership. He clearly, like in any kind of cash game, you probably want Dobbs in there. Just projects so well point per dollar. He is a pretty obviously like strong median play. Smaller field contests would have him, but for the largest field stuff, he's a player that I'm going to have a lot of, but I imagine that I'll be probably under the field here also. 58% just seems a bit much. Einsteinium asked for Matthew Golden's win rate, and I pulled that up here just to it's actually 11.1%, so not like, I actually don't know what is a very good win rate, but lower than all the other Packers receivers. There was some discourse about win rates on Twitter this week, kind of how just the fact that the receiver is open, and even if they run a good route, win rate apparently, and I just learned this week, means that they had to like create the separation themselves to get the win. It can't be like schemed up because the play was done really well. Somebody else got them open. I don't know. It's kind of nuanced, so it's not just about how open they are. Anyway, moving on, Matthew Golden, or I guess we can open it up to all the other Green Bay receivers. Do you have a favorite of Matthew Golden, Jaden Reed, Wicks, Heath, Williams? Who do you like here?
Sorry, I was distracted by the Orioles, something with the Orioles. But for the rest of Green Bay passing game, I'm not getting to too much of it at all, which I kind of would like to be getting more. I have 14% Golden, I have 11% Wicks, I have 9% Reed. The pricing isn't super appealing to me, like 8,200 on Reed. You do have, some added touchdown equity just because like he's a gadget guy that they'll use in the red zone, and try and get the ball in his hands, kind of like Debo. But you also have a guy that already was having trouble, in terms of route participation, just because of how Green Bay structures their offense. Now you also add in a broken foot or whatever the hell his issue is, like 50 to 55% route participation week one. It's just going to always be hard to want that much of an $8,200 guy that's probably going to be on the bench for 50% of the game. Golden coming in at 6,400, like good price tag for the ceiling, but also tough to prioritize when you just have so many good but not great options in this game. So I'm kind of just spreading it out to those other wide receivers and not going too crazy with any of them. I think, there is a lot of volatility. They're probably all going to be running routes 40 to 60% of the time. Wicks on the low end of that, and then Golden and Reed on the higher end. But you're kind of probably just like playing touchdown roulette with all of them. It's hard to expect any of them between a combination of spread out target share and the Packers probably not throwing the ball a ton if they can help it. It's hard to like think that at their respective salaries, any of them are winning you anything just based on like receptions,
right,
or yards. But receptions combined with getting in the end zone, they can get into the optimal lineup really quickly because the opportunity cost on the slate isn't super high in most spots. So I'm kind of just mixing and matching with those guys. Wicks, obviously, I think, the most appealing price tag, but also probably the lowest level of work.
Yeah, no, I think that is yeah, I think I agree with that. Matthew Golden, probably my favorite outside of Dobbs, I think, just because of the price tag and the, kind of the rookie unknown factor. Like, he was injured in week 1, so we really haven't seen a full week of Matthew Golden yet. And I think we could get it here, and we could find out that he's the alpha here pretty soon, or he could ascend to be the alpha. So I kind of like the unknown with the $6,400 Matthew Golden, probably the next best after Dobbs. Reed is scary because he also has kind of the in-game injury risk. Like, re-aggravation is a strong risk from what I understand from the Twitter doctors that I've read. And then Wicks, I like him. I like the price tag. So I think I'm with you that I'm going to be just spreading around. I think overall I like them a little bit better than you do, or at least I think I'm going to be over the field on Golden and Wicks if they actually come in at 10 and 11% ownership. Even with this being touchdown roulette, like, I just think that their odds are a little bit better, and they're going to score a little bit more outside of touchdowns than like the backup tight end that we talk about that situation all the time. I think they're more likely to score like real fantasy points outside of touchdowns, but like you said, it probably comes down to a touchdown to really make them separate, be somebody you really want. I don't know. I think 10%, 11% ownership is low enough that I have more interest there. And then Reed, I probably come in probably under the field here, but not by a ton because he does have that big play upside. All right, let's talk tight ends here. Zach Ertz projected for 24% ownership in the flex, 1% in the captain spot. Scored a touchdown last week. I like that. I don't want to chase, but I think Zach Ertz is just a pretty strong play. I guess 5,800, not like super cheap, but cheap enough that I'm pretty interested. How much you get into of Zach Ertz?
Yeah, I'm getting 22% at flex, which I think is pretty close to ownership projection. And like you said, like, it's not a super exciting play. He's pretty unlikely to like be the guy that you have to win, but he's just kind of like a useful piece when that, again, Washington likes the, get the ball out of Daniel's hands, shorter passes. Ertz is another guy like Debo that can, just kind of fill the middle of the field, the shorter routes, get PPR points, even if it's not super exciting big plays. And again, guys like that just, I think, generally will look better on slates like this, where they're not costing you a roster spot where like you could have CD Lamb or somebody like that. There's not a lot of like sure things, quote unquote, on this slate. So it does become a little bit more appealing to just take the guy that pretty often is going to fall into the optimal lineup just on a result of 5 catches for 50 yards or something. So I think he looks pretty good. I think the ownership's pretty much correct on him. Have him 2% at captain. Like, he's not somebody I want to go crazy with at captain. He's not super cheap, so he's not like allowing you to get some great star-studded lineup outside of him necessarily. Doesn't have the highest ceiling when you consider range of outcomes, but just from like a median standpoint, I think looks pretty good at that price.
Yeah, no, same page. I think he's just a fairly strong play. I think last year, from a schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed perspective, it was a like okay matchup. Let me actually double check. Maybe I'm misremembering this.
While you're pulling that up, one other thing with Ertz, and it goes right hand in hand with the Luke McCaffrey thing. Ben Sinnott not involved last week, so he's the guy that Washington drafted to essentially take over as their pass catching tight end, and through 1 year and 1 season and 1 game, he's been unable to make any sort of impact to make his way onto the field. And for as long as he is unable to earn the ability to even get on the field, it just makes Zach Ertz's role that much more secure because eventually maybe you get into some sort of an ugly timeshare at tight end, but for right now it's just Zach Ertz and he has no competition.
Yeah, it was funny. The coach speak was like, "Oh, we've got a competition there at tight end. It's a really good battle going at tight end," and then that didn't happen at all in week 1. It's just still Zach Ertz, still looking good there. I looked at the schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed last year. It was over the course of the year, it was a slightly positive matchup for tight ends against the Packers, but over the last 5 games, it was a really negative matchup. So make of that, I think it's kind of a neutral matchup for Zach Ertz. I think he's a fine play at 5,800. Somebody asked about Malik Heath. I also looked that up. 17% route participation last week. He is. We talked about Chris Brooks being a strong option at 400 because we have not a ton of really cheap options. I actually think Malik Heath is a pretty strong low, like 200 play. He's probably the strongest $200 play, unless you see somebody better.
200, yeah. I have like 1 to 2% of him. He should be on the field more than 0% of snaps. And at $200, that is kind of enough to make you the best. Right now, I have less of him than Brooks or Chris Moore. I have like the same amount of Heath and John Fitzpatrick, whoever that is. I think third string tight end for Green Bay. But yeah, like he should be out there a little bit. And you do, I guess. I mean, if you really want to play the variance game, we do know that there is a wide receiver with a broken foot playing for the Packers. So there is, at least a little bit of elevated in-game injury risk for one or any combination of not only Wicks, but Heath or Williams to end up playing more.
Yeah, no, I like that call. Just like adds a little bit more volatility, a little bit more potential opportunity for Malik Heath. Oliver close off. You are welcome. Okay. Are you interested in any Bates or Ben Sinnott? I mean, not a ton of involvement last week. We had Bates.
I have 5% Bates right now.
Yeah, 22% is actually not nothing.
Right. So like with Bates, the good thing is he has a clearly defined role. He's a very, very, very good blocker. So he's going to be on the field. He's not a pass catcher, and so he's not going to be super involved in that. But again, it comes down to when you're talking about these really cheap guys, at least just give me somebody that I know is going to be on the field. With like Ben Sinnott, yeah, I guess whatever percentage of the time if he were to get on the field, it's likely that he's out there for a reason and maybe they'll actually look for him. But when you're talking about these really cheap guys, it's at least you're at least getting one obstacle out of the way when you say like, all right, John Bates is going to be on the football field. Now I just need some kind of weird play where they throw him the ball, but which does happen. Like it's not unheard of. And he is probably the guy that, like, if Ertz were to get banged up mid-game, you probably do see more Bates than Sinnott, based at least on what we saw last year, which was another, I think, really damning sign of where Ben Sinnott was at least last year. When Ertz did get banged up, like the natural assumption would be like, oh yeah, this guy you drafted in the second round to be your pass catching tight end is going to step in for your injured pass catching tight end. And Washington was just like, no, now your great blocking tight end is also your leading receiving tight end.
Yeah, no, I mean, as you noted, 55% snaps last week for Bates, and then 21% route participation. So yeah, he seems like a fine option. He's still like the classic tight end where you probably need a touchdown. Otherwise,
which the nice thing too with somebody like Bates is like, yeah, he's not going to draw many, if any, targets, but his value as a receiver does go up at least a little bit the closer to the goal line you are.
Yeah, true. And he's only 600.
Right.
So, maybe even without a touchdown, if he scores 3 fantasy points, could be enough. Yeah, I think he's
sub 100 of the sub 1K guys. I assume John Bates's feet are on the football field more than anybody.
Yeah, that seems likely. Doesn't project, 1.8 fantasy points, but like getting 0 ownership. Yeah, I think that seems like a strong enough play. No Sinnott for you?
No, I don't think I projected him to run a route.
Yeah, he didn't run any last week, so that seems correct. Are you going to play any? Again, Oliver Closeoff wants to know about Yankoff. Ran 1 route last week. Any interest there?
I don't have him, but
okay. I don't think I'm gonna play him either. All right. On the Packers side, you have Tucker Kraft, you have Luke Musgrave. Kraft is 5,400, projected for 46% ownership in the flex, 6% in the captain spot. He looked pretty elite last week. How you feeling about Tucker Kraft?
Yeah, I have a lot of Tucker Kraft. 35% flex is my 4th highest flex. He's my highest owned flex other than the 2 quarterbacks in Jacobs. At captain, I have 3%, which obviously isn't a lot, but it's still my 6th highest. So I am getting to him a lot. We didn't see like a timeshare between him and Musgrave. You saw 70+% route participation from Kraft. It's like sub 20% for Musgrave. Musgrave was actually like the same as John Fitzpatrick, who again, I did not know who that was until I started working through last week's game. So you did see him really separate. And, there like the discourse around him, in the offseason, I guess, was you had one camp being like, oh, Tucker Kraft is only going to get better. And then you had the other camp saying, well, unless he's like the best yards after catch tight end in the history of the NFL. No, he's not. But for a one-game showdown standpoint, you don't really have to make any sort of determination on what you think Tucker Kraft's actual long-term skill level is. He's clearly the tight end one on Green Bay on a team that doesn't have a clear number one wide receiver. They gave him, a carry last week. He's somebody that can just be more utilized around the goal line as well because of his size, whether that, is getting a random handoff or it's, being targeted in the end zone. I just think he looks really good here.
I feel so dumb for not having more Tucker Kraft in best ball because I talked about how much I like him literally all summer. Like I love Tucker Kraft all summer. I posted my exposures on Twitter, and the first comment I got was from Steven in my Discord, said, "I thought you loved Tucker Kraft," because he wasn't in my top tight end exposures somehow, which I think is just a matter of that's where I was drafting quarterbacks usually. So just
that's what I was gonna say. Like I can't be too mad that I don't have more like Tyler Warren or Tucker Kraft or guys like that when Justin Fields is my highest owned quarterback.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It just like it became tough because of but the coach speak was really positive for Tucker Kraft. I think he's a really good player. They asked him they asked LaFleur, could Tucker Kraft be your leading receiver this year? And he was like, yeah, he could be. Like they it seemed pretty positive there. They don't have a clear top receiver. So seemed like a really good click, and I didn't end up with a lot. But on a showdown slate, I can make up for that. 74% routes last week, 4 targets for Tucker Kraft, and just a great yak guy. So I'm into it.
That's the nice thing about DFS too. Like when people were saying to me, like, "Oh, you're going to be like ruined if Croskey-Merritt has a good season," it's like, no, I'm probably just going to play him a bunch in DFS and not give a shit.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Not gonna end your bags. Yeah, I think Kraft looks like a strong play. I like the 6% at ownership just fine. At captain just fine. I don't think I'm gonna be above weight to that, but I think that's a fine number for somebody who's price tag. Are you getting to Luke Musgrave? Some people thought he might have a bigger role this week. He's didn't run a ton of routes. He's 2,400 projected for just 1% ownership. Last week, though, didn't really end up taking any kind of big role, 13% route participation. I guess maybe that was speculation when we thought Jaden Reed was going to be out, that Luke Musgrave might play a little bit more, but just kind of a classic backup tight end at this point, right? Just we're hoping for a touchdown.
Yeah, I have 1% of him and of Fitzpatrick, where like clearly I would expect on average Musgrave to be more involved than Fitzpatrick, even though it was very similar last week. But you're also getting, a $2,200 discount going to Fitzpatrick. So I think they're both kind of the same play, where like Musgrave, I assume, has the slightly added benefit of if Tucker Kraft gets hurt during the game, Musgrave is out there a bunch, probably. But if you assume that nobody gets hurt, that affects this situation. I think they're similar in that like their clearest path to success would just be they catch the random touchdown. They're both cheap enough that that's good, but 2,400 for Musgrave is in that McNichols category where like it might not be good enough. You do get the benefit with somebody like Musgrave though, where like if he scores a touchdown, that's a minimum 7 points as opposed to 6. But yeah, I mean, I have 1% of both. There was nothing at all positive about Musgrave's usage last week.
40% snaps is fine. Ran,
but like even that,
13.
So like he's still out there less than John Bates.
Yeah, I mean he's out there less than John Bates. Also running fewer routes, only 13% route participation. Fitzpatrick actually ran 22% of the routes. So there's a positive for Fitzpatrick. And Fitzpatrick is cheaper, as you said. Yeah, I think in either case you probably need a touchdown. Maybe you can get away without a touchdown for Fitzpatrick at his price tag. Maybe just like a catch is enough there. Yeah, seems like a fine play at no ownership. Anything else on tight ends?
No.
All right. Moving on, defenses and kickers. We have Matt Gay coming in at 13% flex ownership, 1% captain ownership at 4,600. Commanders defense is 4,400 coming in at 9% flex ownership, 0% captain ownership. And then we have Brandon McManus, 5,000, 16% flex, 1% captain. Packers D, 4,800, 7% flex, 0% captain. It's a tough matchup for the defenses. I always like whenever I see defenses in single digit ownership, I get a little bit interested. But this is not like a great matchup for either of them. How are you feeling about defenses, kickers? Any big stands for you there?
I'm not getting to much of the defenses right now. I do think they come in a little bit higher owned than that projection just because like people click them. I expect them to be lower owned than usual on this slate, but I do think they come in a little bit higher, like 10 to 15%. So I'm not getting too much of them, and there's a couple reasons for it. One, you already mentioned both of these teams having pretty solid O lines. Obviously, Green Bay adding Michael Parsons adds to like their sack upside. But again, if you go back to the assumption that like both of these teams would probably prefer to run more than they pass, that is not ideal for defensive upside. You're losing out on pick sixes. You're losing out on sacks. Both offenses are good. Both offensive lines are expected to be good. But then also when you just think about, again, the construction of this slate, usually defenses are appealing because there's like barbell on skill player pricing, and you have a bunch of guys like 6-7K or higher, and then you have your dart throw guys at like 2K or less. On this slate you just have a bunch of skill position guys between 4 and 6K. I'd rather just be throwing darts at like what Green Bay receiver is going to catch a pass in the end zone than defenses. So I'm not getting too much of them. I am getting to the kickers, like 20 to 30%. I would give like a slight edge probably to Green Bay there, just because Dan Quinn likes to go for it on fourth down a lot. But also McManus is $400 more expensive than Matt Gay, so that kind of just washes it out. And right now I actually have a little bit more Matt Gay than McManus, but I do prefer the kickers collectively compared to the defenses here, really, without a doubt.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Two like pretty good offenses and pretty good defenses. I have this is not like a researched thought of mine. It's just a instinct is like this usually sets up for kickers, because it's like, okay, the offense is good enough to move it down the field, and then the defense is also pretty strong, so they'll stop them in field goal range. But that's just an instinct, not really anything that I have any kind of reason other than instinct to believe. Kickers tend to be good in these kind of games, where it also you don't need as many points because we're not expecting this to be a super high scoring game. Yeah, I like the instinct to play more kickers. Anything else we need to talk about here? I will probably be putting out a video later on how to run the Sims for this slate, so people can keep an eye out for that. Adam, do you have any more thoughts on this game?
No, and I may be putting out a video later looking at our prop sniper tool. I want to kind of comb back through projections before I do that, though, to make sure everything looks the way I want. So maybe later, maybe not till next week, but that will be a video that in general is coming out on the Run the Sims channel in the somewhat near future.
Okay. And that is there's a Run the Sims channel and a Run the Sims live channel. Make sure that you're subscribed to both of those channels, because on the Run the Sims channel, they put out videos pre-produced where they, record them and then put them out. And then the Run the Sims live, you'll have people doing live shows from time to time. So recommend checking out the Run the Sims YouTube channels as well. And again, if you want to check out Run the Sims, you can use promo code Neil, get 10% off your first payment for whatever package. Look out for another video on this channel on how I'm running the Sims tonight. And then, of course, I will be back 85 minutes prior to lock to go through the game once again. Once we have inactives out, I'll be doing this same kind of format, going through position by position. But then at the end, I actually will run the Sims. You'll be able to see my process in creating my lineups. All right, Adam, anything else coming out for you?
Maybe, but it depends if I do that video or not. Otherwise,
that's the one thing. Okay, good. All right, cool. Well, find Adam on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. I'm at PlayerQDFS on Twitter. You can find me later on this channel. Thank you all for hanging out with us, and we'll be back on Monday. All right, later.